Gavin Newsom or Ron DeSantis? Which one is the better governor? This was posted by Elon Musk just minutes ago next from the Iced Coffee Hour podcast, which is a pretty great summary between the two.
2 years ago, Hurricane Ian demolished Southwest Florida. Immediately after the hurricane, everybody on the news was saying to rebuild the Sanibel Causeway, which is about 4 miles, was going to take 3 years. That's what everybody was saying. DeSantis basically had it rebuilt in a month because he brought all the best contractors down. He took everybody to the bridge and basically said, what do we need to do? We gave him our recommendations and he started making it happen the next day. That's proper, competent governance. We're just so not used to that. We're used to what you fled in California, an ever-growing state that taxes endlessly and punishes people for success. And then it's like, how is it that I have nice clean roads in Florida? How is it that we don't have homeless people? Why do things work with no income tax in Florida? And why does Cali tax the high hell out of you and have much worse services and much worse infrastructure and a whole series of other problems? So the government shouldn't do much. Everything should be dealt with at the state and local level. And then the federal government should have a couple things that they're supposed to do. So that would be border, make sure the states aren't warring with each other, interstate commerce, foreign policy. I would say the founders basically got it completely right.
I think he's 100% right about this. I think Gavin Newsom did a terrible job with California, and Ron DeSantis is pretty much made Florida a red state again, and people are moving to Florida because it's much, much better to live there than in California. And look at the debate.
Well, I'm looking at total time. Governor DeSantis about 2 minutes.
This is a map of San Francisco. There's a lot of plots on that. You may be asking, what is that plotting? Well, this is an app where they plot the human feces that are found on the streets of San Francisco. And you see how almost the whole thing is covered, because that is what has happened in one of the previous greatest cities this country's ever had. Human feces is now a fact of life, except when a communist dictator comes to town. Then they cleaned up the streets. They lined the streets with Chinese flags. They didn't put American flags.
Well, I'm looking at total time.
Wow, just wow. That was a harsh critique of Gavin Newsom by Ron DeSantis. And I must agree with Ron DeSantis on this one. San Francisco is definitely not what it used to be, unfortunately. Just look at this post. You can just make out the difference between Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis preparing their state for a disaster. This is California's water reservoir right now, completely empty, not functioning at all. And there you have Florida and Ron DeSantis state, basically, with plenty of resources to deal with crisis and rebuild right there. This is basically the interview from Gavin Newsom in California on how he will deal with the wildfires that are going on right now.
What is the situation with the water? Obviously, in Palisades, ran out last night in the hydrants. I was talking to the firefighter on this block. They left because there was no water in the hydrant here.
The local folks are trying to figure that out. I mean, just when you have a system that's not dissimilar to what we've seen in other extraordinarily large-scale fires.
What is the situation with the water?
Local folk are gonna figure that out, he says. He basically takes no responsibility, no accountability. He's basically a complete tool and useless. And look at Ron DeSantis, what he's saying in comparison.
I think currently now it's about 3.4 million that are out. I think they've restored about 700,000 since the storm started. So just do the math. You're over 4 million have lost power since the start of this storm. Fortunately, Florida, we pre-staged 50,000 linemen throughout the state of Florida, and so those folks are going to work. And it's not as easy to do when you've just had Hurricane Helene. A lot of these linemen, there's still hundreds of thousands of people without power in North Carolina, Georgia, some of those states. Helene in Florida, we did 2.4 million restorations in record time. That's not the norm. And so finding the linemen, given what they're doing now, we brought them in from as far away as California. But those folks are there. There's assessments being done about what needs to be done. When you have down power lines, that's actually easy for them to do. They just put the pole back up, reconnect it. If their entire system needs a rebuild, that will take a little longer. We don't know that that's the case in many of these spots. I remember in Hurricane Ian, which was stronger than this one, hit Fort Myers Beach, and FPL substation on Fort Myers Beach right there at Ground Zero was fine. They could have had people hooked up to power days later. Just the people's homes couldn't accept it because.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what a competent governor looks like. He knows his stuff. He knows his numbers. He knows exactly what to do in case of emergency, and not what Gavin Newsom is doing. Let's look at how he handles the press brilliantly right there.
It's not appropriate for the president-elect or a president to be criticizing.
Is it appropriate for people in your industry to try to create division and to try to create narratives anytime these things happen? Now, you're not as interested in doing that because Newsom is a D. If Newsom was a Republican, you guys would go you would have him nailed to the wall for what they're doing over there. And I know we've dealt with it. We just assume in Florida, anytime something happens, it's going to be politicized by the media. So you guys sitting in judgment of Donald Trump, I mean, excuse me, I think your track record of politicizing these things is very, very bad.
Okay, last question.
Newsom should resign and that the wildfires are all his fault. So do you agree with those comments?
I remember when we had the Surfside Tower collapse, I had people from the Washington Post trying to blame me for it immediately without having any facts or anything. Oh, he didn't declare a state of emergency. First of all, state of emergency doesn't mean you can't respond. It's all that. Excuse me?
Biden did it. I think that's what you said.
Well, but what I'm telling you is you guys are trying to make an issue of it when I have watched from this seat. In fact, when I got elected governor, I was meeting with some of the other Republican governors, and what they would say is, hey, if you have a natural disaster, just know media's coming at you, they're going to do it. It's not the same. That mayor of L.A., if that were a Republican mayor, I could only imagine what that would do. I mean, you know the fires are at high risk, and you try to go to Africa or wherever she was to go on some type of voyage. You should have been there preparing and doing that, and yet I don't see a lot of heat being directed in that thing. And so, you know, I'd like to see some balance on how this is done. You could criticize the president-elect, but I think you also have to hold these other people accountable, and I have not seen that.
That was beautiful. He handled the question brilliantly, right back at the reporter. Ron DeSantis absolutely destroys Kamala Harris for politicizing Ellen and Milton disaster response. That's exactly what he was saying in the clip right there, how the Democrats are politicizing everything. This is posted by Charlie Kirk on X. I've worked on these hurricanes under both Trump and Biden. Neither of them ever tried to politicize it. She has never called on any of the storm we've had since she's been vice president. Just hear it from him.
Listen to what she said. Well, we don't have the sound, but she said, you know, moment of crisis, if nothing else, should really be the moment that anyone calls himself a leader, says they're going to put politics aside and put the people first. People are in desperate need of support right now and playing political games at this moment in these crisis situations. These are the height of emergency situations. It's just utterly irresponsible, and it's selfish, and it's about political gamemanship. What's your response?
Well, I think she should look in the mirror. We've been on an emergency footing for 2 weeks straight, round the clock, 24/7. We've been working, my office, our Division of Emergency Management, helping people prepare for Hurricane Helene, helping effectuate rescues of people after Hurricane Helene, helping people pick up the pieces of their lives after Helene, and then have to also turn around and prepare for major impacts and maybe even more impacts from Hurricane Milton, be able to have rescue personnel ready to help people, and then, of course, help with the power restoration, all these things to do. So that's been my sole focus. My focus has not been on dealing with Kamala Harris. I saw the news report. I didn't know she tried to contact me. But I'd also say it's not about you, Kamala. Right. It's about the people of Florida. My focus is exactly where it should be. And I can tell you this. I've worked on these hurricanes under both President Trump and President Biden. Neither of them ever tried to politicize it. She has never called on any of the storms we've had since she's been vice president until apparently now. Why all of a sudden is she trying to parachute in and inject herself when she's never shown any interest in the past? We know it's because of politics. We know it's because of her campaign. I have zero time to entertain these political games. We're going to continue to do what we need to do to prepare and respond to what may be one of the most damaging storms in the history of the United States. So she says focusing on protecting your people is selfish. I think she ought to look in the mirror.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Great response by Ron DeSantis. I don't know about you, but I think Gavin Newsom is a tool. He is completely useless. He did a terrible job with California, and because of it, of his mismanagement of water resources and forest, now LA is completely burned down. This is sad to see. Honestly, I think Rubin from the Rubin report was completely right. Gavin Newsom and California is not a great place to live anymore just because of this man right there. And his terrible bills, terrible policies. It's sad to see. Many people are moving to California and to Florida, for good reason. Let me know what you think about this. I hope this was enjoyable to watch for you. Click right there to watch the next video, and I will see you there. Bye bye.